Hi, I'm Dr. Kurt Woeller. I want to talk about mold and mycotoxins with regards to autism. Now, it's not to say that mold and mycotoxin exposure isn't important for other individuals with other health issues, but I want to break down the difference. So mold, okay, are these organisms, Aspergillus, Penicillium, Stachybotrys, that are in our environment. Aspergillus mold is very common, for example. And these mold, what are called mold spores, can trigger illnesses. So for example, in the lungs, they can trigger inflammation and respiratory problems. In the sinuses, they can trigger inflammation as well. And so the mold spore itself can actually trigger allergic type of reactions that people can react to. But these molds also produce what are called mycotoxins. The toxin, myco meaning fungus, a fungal origin with a toxin, right? So they produce these chemicals that have their own adverse effects. So for example, ochratoxin is a mycotoxin of Aspergillus mold. Mycophenolic is a mycotoxin of Penicillium mold. And most of these mycotoxins have adverse effects on the immune system, adverse effects on the brain and nervous system. Some are carcinogenic, like ochratoxin. The thing about the mycotoxins is they're really small chemicals. They can get into our cells, they can disrupt our DNA and RNA and function of our immune system. And they're really different than the mold. The mold can actually disappear. So you could take an antifungal medication and let's say to kill off the mold, but the mycotoxin might be left behind. And so there is a difference between them, even though the mycotoxin came from the mold. Now, the organic acids test that Great Plains Laboratory provides markers for fungal exposure. And they do have some markers, particularly on page 1, that are indicative of Aspergillus mold and another mold called Fusarium, which are environmental molds. And when those organic acids, those chemicals, show up on the organic acid test, it generally indicates that there's some kind of gut colonization from those molds. But that's different than the mycotoxins. So the mold is showing up, but the organic acid test is not a mycotoxin test. You'd have to do a separate mycotoxin profile that Great Plains has as well. And so I often advocate is doing the organic acid test as well as the mycotoxin profile. That way you get a more accurate assessment of total mold exposure. Now, there are some other blood tests that can be done to look at mold allergy, and then there are home test kits that can be done to see if there's mold actually in the home. But the organic acid test and the mycotox profile give a chemical assessment of mold exposure and then the chemical effects of what sometimes these toxins do, whether it's creating imbalances in the mitochondria, for example, or other areas in the body metabolically. And this is critically important in autism because many of these mycotoxins, again, can adversely affect the brain or nervous system, particularly affecting attention, focusing, behavior, environmental awareness, speech and language. So critically important concept to understand, and those two tests are really important to do from my experience with anybody who's dealing with a special needs diagnosis. Okay, I'm Dr. Kurt Woeller, thank you.